The bullet grazed her father's barn wall the same night. Zara Gallagher learned that every promise a man makes comes wrapped in lies. And she was only 19 years old when she decided never to believe another word that fell from male lips. It was 1878 in Council Bluffs, Iowa, a town perched on the edge of the Missouri River where the railroad brought opportunity and trouble in equal measure. The streets smelled of horse manure and coal smoke, and the saloons stayed open long past decent hours. Zara lived on the outskirts with her father, Thomas Gallagher, on a struggling cattle ranch that had seen better days before her mother died giving birth to her. Her father had raised her alone, teaching her to ride, to rope, and to trust no one who didn't earn it through actions rather than words. The bullet that night came from the gun of Daniel Marsh, a ranch hand her father had trusted for 3 years. Daniel had been courting Zara for 6 months, speaking sweet words about marriage and building a life together. He told her she was beautiful when she doubted it, told her he loved her when she questioned it, told her they would have a future when she feared they wouldn't. Then she discovered he had been stealing cattle, selling them 2 towns over, and planning to disappear with the money. When her father confronted him, Daniel drew his gun. The shot missed, and Daniel rode off into the darkness, leaving behind only his lies and the echo of gunfire. Zara stood in the barn that night, her whole body shaking, not from fear but from rage. "Never again," she whispered to the horses. "Never again will I believe a single kind word from any man." Her father put his hand on her shoulder. "Not all men are liars, Zara." "Name one who isn't," she said, her green eyes hard as glass. Thomas Gallagher couldn't answer. He had seen too much of the world to make promises he couldn't keep. 3 months later, Mason Grant rode into Council Bluffs with nothing but a horse, a worn saddle, and a reputation for being the most honest cowboy in 3 states. He was 24 years old, tall and lean with dark hair that needed cutting and brown eyes that seemed to see straight through to a person's soul. He had worked ranches from Texas to Montana, and everywhere he went, people said the same thing about Mason Grant. His word was his bond. He needed work, and the Gallagher ranch needed hands. Thomas hired him on the spot after a 10-minute conversation. Something about Mason's direct gaze and firm handshake convincing the older man that here was someone worth trusting. Zara disagreed the moment she saw him. "Another drifter," she said to her father that first evening as they watched Mason settle into the bunkhouse. "Another man with a smooth tongue who will rob us blind and disappear." "Give him a chance," her father said. "I gave Daniel a chance. Look where that got us." Mason Grant's first words to Zara Gallagher were spoken the next morning when she was mucking out stalls, her dark hair tied back with a strip of leather, her worn dress covered by an oversized work shirt that had belonged to her father. "Morning," Mason said, leading his horse into the barn. "I'm Mason. Your father hired me yesterday." Zara didn't look up. "I know who you are." "Well, it's good to meet you properly," he said, and his voice was warm, genuinely friendly. "Your father speaks highly of you." "Save your breath," Zara said, finally meeting his eyes. "I'm not interested in conversation, compliments, or anything else you might want to offer. Do your work, stay out of my way, and we'll get along fine." Mason blinked, clearly taken aback, but he nodded slowly. "Understood, Miss Gallagher." She watched him lead his horse to a stall, expecting him to be angry or insulted, but he just went about his work with quiet efficiency. That was the first surprise. Daniel had always needed her attention, her approval, her admiration. Mason seemed content to simply exist in his own space. Over the following weeks, Zara observed Mason carefully, waiting for him to reveal his true nature. She watched for him to slack off when her father wasn't looking, but he worked harder than any hand they'd ever employed. She watched for him to pocket small items or skim from the feed money, but the accounts balanced perfectly. She watched for him to speak false compliments or make unwanted advances, but he treated her with distant respect, saying good morning and good evening and little else. It infuriated her that she couldn't find fault with him. One afternoon in late September, Zara was struggling to repair a section of fence that had collapsed during a storm. The posts were heavy, and she was trying to lift one into position when Mason appeared beside her. "Let me help with that," he said, reaching for the post. "I don't need your help," Zara said, even though her arms were trembling with the effort. "I can see that," Mason said mildly, "but it'll go faster with two people, and your father wanted this fence finished before dark." Zara wanted to refuse, but practicality won out. She nodded curtly, and together they lifted the post into position. They worked in silence for an hour, their movements gradually synchronizing until they were anticipating each other's actions, passing tools without needing to ask. When the fence was secure, Mason stepped back and wiped sweat from his forehead. "You're good at this," he said. "Don't," Zara said sharply. "Don't what?" "Don't give me false compliments. I know what I am and what I'm not." Mason frowned. "It wasn't false. You handled those tools like you've been doing this your whole life, because you probably have. That's just an observation, not a compliment meant to curry favor." Zara felt something uncomfortable twist in her chest. She didn't know how to respond, so she gathered the remaining tools and walked back to the barn without another word. That night, her father mentioned at dinner that Mason had turned down a higher-paying job at the Morrison Ranch, 3 miles away. "Said he gave us his word he'd work here, and he doesn't break his word," Thomas said. His tone approving. Zara said nothing, but she thought about it as she lay in bed that night. Men didn't turn down better opportunities unless they had an ulterior motive. She resolved to watch Mason even more carefully. October brought cold winds and early frost. The work on the ranch intensified as they prepared for winter, and Zara found herself working alongside Mason more often simply because there were only the three of them to handle everything. Her father's health had been declining, though he tried to hide it, and increasingly it fell to Zara and Mason to manage the hardest tasks. One morning, Zara went to the barn before dawn to find one of their best breeding cows in distress, trying to birth a calf that was positioned wrong. She rolled up her sleeves and tried to help, but the cow was in bad shape and Zara felt panic rising in her throat. They couldn't afford to lose this cow. Mason appeared in the barn entrance, lamp in hand. "I heard her from the bunkhouse," he said. He assessed the situation quickly, then knelt beside Zara. "The calf's breech. We need to turn it." "I know," Zara said through gritted teeth. "I'm trying." "Let me," Mason said gently. His hands were larger than hers, his arms stronger. He worked with careful precision, speaking in low, soothing tones to the cow. Zara held the lamp and watched his face, seeing nothing but concentration and genuine concern for the animal. It took 45 minutes, but Mason successfully turned the calf and helped it into the world. The little creature lay wet and steaming on the straw, and after a heart-stopping moment, it took its first breath. The mother cow lowed softly and began cleaning her baby. Mason sat back on his heels, covered in blood and birth fluids, and smiled. It was the first time Zara had seen him truly smile, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made her heart skip unexpectedly. "Good work," she said quietly. "We make a good team," Mason replied, standing and offering her his hand to help her up. Zara hesitated, then took it. His grip was warm and solid, and he released her hand immediately once she was on her feet. No lingering touch, no inappropriate pressure, just a simple gesture of assistance. "Thank you," Zara said, the words feeling strange on her tongue. She couldn't remember the last time she'd thanked a man for anything. "No need," Mason said. "This is the work. It's what we do." They walked back through the cold pre-dawn darkness together, and Zara felt something inside her shift slightly, like ice beginning to crack. November brought the first snow, and with it, a crisis. Thomas Gallagher collapsed in the barn one afternoon, clutching his chest. Zara screamed for Mason, who came running and helped carry her father into the house. They sent for the doctor in town, and Zara sat by her father's bedside, terrified and trying not to show it. Mason took over all the ranch work without being asked. He worked from before sunrise until after dark, doing the jobs of 3 men. When Zara finally emerged from the house after 2 days at her father's side, she found that the animals had been fed, the water troughs had been broken free of ice, and firewood had been stacked by the house. Mason was in the barn, mending tack by lamplight. He looked exhausted. "You should rest," Zara said. He looked up, his eyes finding hers. "How's your father?" "The doctor says his heart is weak. He needs to rest, avoid strain." She swallowed hard. "He might not be able to work the ranch anymore." Mason nodded slowly. "We'll manage." "We?" Zara said, her defenses rising automatically. "This isn't your problem. This isn't your ranch." "I work here," Mason said simply. "That makes it my problem until you tell me otherwise." "Why?" The word burst out of Zara before she could stop it. "Why do you care? What do you want from us?" Mason set down the tack he'd been working on and stood up, facing her directly. "I don't want anything except an honest day's pay for an honest day's work. Your father gave me a job when I needed one, and I intend to honor that. If that's changed because of his health, tell me now, and I'll move on. But I won't abandon you both in the middle of a crisis." Zara stared at him, searching his face for signs of deception, for the crack in the mask that would reveal the lie beneath. She found nothing but steady sincerity. "I don't understand you," she said finally. "What's to understand?" "I'm a cowboy. I work cattle. I keep my word. That's all I am." "Nobody is that simple." "Maybe I am," Mason said. He picked up the tack again. "Get some rest, Miss Gallagher. You look dead on your feet." Zara wanted to argue, but she was exhausted. She returned to the house and fell into bed, and for the first time in years, she dreamed of something other than betrayal. The winter was hard. Thomas Gallagher recovered enough to give orders from his chair by the fire, but he could no longer do physical labor. The ranch's survival fell to Zara and Mason, and they worked together through freezing winds and endless snow. They lost 2 cows to the cold, but saved the rest. They repaired damage from winter storms, broke ice from water sources, and hauled feed through drifts that sometimes reached their knees. Through it all, Mason never complained, never faltered, and never asked for anything beyond his wages. He spoke to Zara with the same respectful distance he'd maintained from the beginning, saying what needed to be said and no more. And slowly, grudgingly, Zara began to trust that he would be there when she needed him. One evening in late December, Zara was in the barn checking on the animals when she heard riders approaching. 3 men on horseback appeared in the doorway, and she recognized them as hands from the Morrison ranch, including Jack Morrison himself, the owner's son. Jack was drunk, and his companions weren't much better. "Well, well," Jack said, dismounting unsteadily. "Pretty Zara Gallagher all alone." "I'm working," Zara said coldly. "You should leave." "Now, that's not friendly," Jack said, moving closer. "I came to make you an offer. My father wants to buy your ranch. Your daddy's sick, you can't run this place alone. Sell to us and I'll make sure you're taken care of." His grin was ugly. "Real good care." Zara's hand moved to the pitchfork leaning against the stall. "Get out, or what?" Jack laughed. "You going to fight all 3 of us?" "No," said Mason's voice from behind them, "but she won't have to." The three men turned to find Mason standing in the barn entrance, his rifle held loosely but ready. He looked calm, almost relaxed, but there was something in his eyes that made Jack's friends take a step back. "This doesn't concern you, Grant," Jack said. "Miss Gallagher works for her father and I work for her father. That makes it my concern. Now you heard the lady. Time to leave." "You going to shoot us?" Jack sneered, though he didn't sound confident. "If I have to," Mason said, "but I'd rather not waste the ammunition. Your choice." The standoff lasted a long moment, then Jack's friends grabbed his arms and pulled him toward his horse. "This isn't over," Jack called as they mounted up. "Yeah, it is," Mason said. They rode off into the darkness, and Zara realized she'd been holding her breath. She exhaled slowly, then looked at Mason. "Thank you," she said. "You had it handled," Mason said, lowering the rifle, "but I figured you could use backup." "How did you know they were here?" "I didn't. I was just coming to check the livestock before bed." He leaned the rifle against the wall. "You should tell your father about the Morrison offer. He needs to know they're pressuring you. He'll just worry. He'll worry more if something happens and he didn't know about it." Mason moved to check the animals, his movements methodical and calm, as if nothing unusual had occurred. Zara watched him, feeling that crack in her ice grow wider. He had come to her aid without hesitation, without expecting praise or gratitude. He had treated the threat seriously, but hadn't made it about himself or his own bravery. He had simply done what needed doing. "Mason," she said. He turned to look at her. "Why did you really come to Council Bluffs? What are you running from?" "Nothing," he said. "I'm not running. I'm just a cowboy looking for good work and honest people. I found both here. People don't drift around unless they're running from something." Mason was quiet for a long moment, then he said, "My parents died when I was 16. Cholera. I've been on my own since then, working where I could, moving when the work dried up. That's not running. That's just surviving." The simple honesty in his voice struck Zara like a physical blow. She realized she'd been so busy looking for deception that she hadn't considered that his story might simply be true. "I'm sorry about your parents," she said. "Thank you. I'm sorry about your mother. I never knew her." "That might be even harder," Mason said. They stood in the warm barn with the snow falling softly outside, and Zara felt something shift inside her that she didn't fully understand. She wasn't ready to call it trust, not yet, but it was something close. Christmas came and went quietly. Zara cooked a better meal than usual, and Thomas insisted Mason eat with them in the house rather than alone in the bunkhouse. Mason brought small gifts, a new hat for Thomas that he'd bought in town, and for Zara, a pair of leather work gloves that were well made and practical. "I noticed your old ones were falling apart," he said simply when she stared at them in surprise. She hadn't expected any gift at all. She'd made him nothing. "Thank you," she managed. "They're just gloves," Mason said, but he looked pleased. That night, after Mason had returned to the bunkhouse and her father had gone to bed, Zara sat by the fire and ran her fingers over the leather gloves. They fit perfectly. He had noticed her hands, noticed what she needed, and acted on it without fanfare or expectation. Daniel had given her flowers and poems, pretty useless things meant to dazzle and distract. Mason had given her gloves because her hands were cold. She didn't know what to do with the feeling that created in her chest. January of 1879 brought brutal cold and a new challenge. 2 of the pregnant cows birthed early, and the calves were weak. Zara and Mason took turns sitting up with them at night, keeping them warm, coaxing them to nurse. During one of these long nights, Zara found herself sitting in the barn with Mason at 2 in the morning, both of them wrapped in blankets, a small calf nestled between them. "Tell me something true," Zara said suddenly. Mason looked at her quizzically. "What do you mean?" You're always so straightforward, so simple in your answers. Tell me something deeper. Tell me what you want from life." Mason was quiet for a long time, his hand stroking the calf's head. "I want a place to belong," he said finally. "I want to wake up in the same place every morning and know that I'm building something that will last. I want people around me who keep their word, and I want to be someone they can count on. I want a family eventually. Kids. A wife who sees me as a partner, not just a provider. I want to grow old somewhere and know I made a difference, even a small one." He paused. "What about you? What do you want?" Zara's throat tightened. Nobody had asked her that question in years. "I want to stop being afraid," she said quietly. "I want to trust someone and not wait for them to betray me. I want to believe that kind words can actually be true." "They can be," Mason said, his voice gentle. "But I understand why you doubt. Someone hurt you badly." "Someone I trusted," Zara corrected. "Someone I believed." "Then he was a fool," Mason said, "because your trust is clearly not given lightly, which makes it valuable." Zara looked at him sharply, searching for manipulation in his words, but found only sincerity. "You don't even know me. I know you work harder than any person I've ever met. I know you love your father and would do anything for him. I know you're smart and capable and stronger than you think you are. I know you're afraid to believe compliments, so I try not to give them, but sometimes the truth just sounds like a compliment because it's good." Zara felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them away furiously. "Stop." "All right," Mason said easily and turned his attention back to the calf. They sat in silence for a while and then Zara said, "Thank you for staying. For helping us through this winter, we wouldn't have made it without you." "Yes, you would have," Mason said, "but I'm glad I could help make it easier." The calf between them made a small sound and struggled to its feet. It tottered over to its mother and began to nurse, and both Zara and Mason smiled at the sight. "Life's stubborn," Mason said. "It keeps fighting to exist, even when things are hard." "Is that why you keep going?" Zara asked. "Even when you have no family, no home, nothing permanent?" "I keep going because I believe something better is always possible," Mason said. "I've seen the worst of people, but I've also seen the best. I'd rather keep looking for the best." Zara thought about that for days afterward. She had spent so long focusing on the worst that she'd almost forgotten the best could exist. February brought a false thaw and then more snow. Supplies ran low in town and prices rose. The Gallagher ranch's savings were nearly depleted, and Thomas worried constantly about money. Mason quietly gave back half his wages, saying he didn't need much and they needed it more. "I can't accept this," Thomas said. "Then call it a loan," Mason said. "Pay me back when the calves sell in spring." "Why would you do this?" Zara demanded. "What do you gain?" Mason looked at her steadily. "A place to sleep, food to eat, and work that matters. I already have what I need." "This is just helping friends through a hard time." "We're not friends," Zara said, but the words sounded hollow even to her. "All right," Mason said. "Call it helping my employers then." Thomas accepted the money because he had no choice, but Zara saw how it weighed on him. That night she confronted Mason in the barn. "You're making my father feel like a charity case," she said. "That's not my intention." "Then what is your intention? Why do you keep doing things like this? Nobody is this selfless. What's your angle?" Mason set down the saddle he'd been cleaning and turned to face her fully. "You want the truth? The real truth?" "Yes. I care about you," Mason said. "Both of you. Your father reminds me of what I lost when my parents died, and I'm grateful for the chance to help someone who needs it. And you." He paused, then continued carefully. "You're the strongest, most stubborn, most frustrating woman I've ever met, and somewhere along the way, I started hoping you might eventually see me as something other than just another liar waiting to disappoint you." Zara's heart was pounding. What are you saying? I'm saying I've come to care for you as more than just my employer's daughter. But I know you don't trust easily, and I know you've been hurt. So I'm not asking for anything. I'm just telling you the truth because you asked for it. You can't, Zara said, her voice shaking. You can't care for me. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. I've known it for a while now. Then you're a fool, Zara said and fled to the house. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like her whole world had tilted sideways. Mason cared for her. He had said it plainly, without poetry or pretense. And the worst part, the terrifying part, was that she felt something for him too. Somewhere in the long months of working beside him, watching him keep every promise, seeing him help without asking for recognition, she had started to feel things she'd sworn never to feel again. But feelings were dangerous. Feelings led to trust, and trust led to betrayal. She avoided Mason as much as possible over the next week, which was difficult considering they lived and worked in the same small space. He didn't push, didn't demand conversation or explanation. He just continued working, his behavior unchanged, his steady presence a constant reminder of what he'd said. Then came the day in late February when disaster struck. A winter storm rolled in with shocking speed, catching Zara out checking the fences in the far pasture. The wind rose to a shriek, and snow fell so thick she couldn't see 5 feet ahead. She tried to make it back to the ranch but got turned around in the white blindness. Panic set in as the cold bit through her coat. She'd heard stories of people freezing to death within sight of their own homes, unable to find their way in blizzard conditions. She kept walking, hoping she was going in the right direction, but her feet were going numb and her face felt frozen. Then, through the howling wind, she heard someone calling her name. Zara, Zara. Mason materialized out of the snow like a phantom, his face red with cold, a rope tied around his waist. "Grab on," he shouted. She seized the rope with numb fingers and Mason pulled her against him, wrapping his arms around her. "Follow the rope," he shouted in her ear. "It leads back to the house." They stumbled through the storm together, Mason keeping his body between her and the worst of the wind. It felt like hours but was probably only minutes before the dark shape of the house emerged from the white. They crashed through the door, and Thomas cried out in relief. "Thank God, Zara, I was terrified." Mason quickly shut the door against the wind and snow. Zara was shaking violently, her teeth chattering too hard to speak. Mason stripped off her wet coat and wrapped her in blankets, then knelt to remove her frozen boots. "Get her by the fire," he ordered Thomas. "I need to check her hands and feet for frostbite." Zara let him lead her to the fireplace, too cold and shocked to protest. Mason carefully examined her fingers and toes, his touch gentle but thorough. "No frostbite," he said finally. "You were lucky." "You came after me," Zara managed through chattering teeth. "Of course I did." "You could have died." "So could you," Mason said. He looked up at her, his brown eyes intense. "Did you really think I'd let you freeze out there?" "The rope," Zara said, remembering. "You tied yourself to the house. It's an old trick. Seen men use it in Montana during bad storms." "I noticed you hadn't come back, and I knew you were out there somewhere." He stood up. "I'm going to make you some hot coffee." He moved to the kitchen, and Thomas sat down beside Zara, taking her hand. "That young man loves you," her father said quietly. "Papa don't. It's true. A man doesn't risk his life in a blizzard for someone he doesn't love, and I think you love him too, even if you're too stubborn to admit it." "I'm not stubborn. I'm careful. There's a difference." "Zara, I know Daniel hurt you, but Mason isn't Daniel. He's proved that 100 times over." "He's proved he's a good worker," Zara said, but even she didn't believe the words. Mason returned with hot coffee, and they all sat by the fire while the storm raged outside. At one point, Zara caught Mason's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." He nodded once, a small smile on his lips, and went back to staring at the fire. The storm lasted 2 days, trapping them all in the house. It was the longest time Zara had spent in Mason's company in an enclosed space, and she found herself noticing small things about him. The way he always let others serve themselves food first. The way he listened when Thomas told stories about the old days, truly listened instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. The way he helped with dishes without being asked, and chopped wood even though his shoulder was clearly paining him from an old injury. On the second night, Thomas went to bed early, leaving Zara and Mason alone by the fire. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but full of unspoken things. "I'm sorry," Zara said finally. "For what? For running away? From what you said in the barn?" "You don't need to apologize for protecting yourself," Mason said. "You told me the truth and I called you a fool." "Maybe I am a fool," Mason said with a slight smile, "but at least I'm an honest one." Zara pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I don't know how to trust you. I want to, but I don't know how." "Then don't," Mason said simply. "Not yet. Just let me keep showing up, keep keeping my word, keep being here. Eventually, maybe you'll see that I mean what I say." "How long are you willing to wait?" "As long as it takes." "That's a stupid answer," Zara said, but there was no heat in it. "What if it takes years? What if I never trust you?" "Then at least I tried," Mason said. "At least I showed you that not every man is a liar. Even if you don't trust me, maybe you'll trust the next person a little easier." Zara looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something crack open inside her chest. "You risked your life for me in that storm." "Yes." "Why? Because I care what happens to you. I already told you that. But you could have died." "So could you," Mason repeated. "That wasn't acceptable to me." Zara felt tears burning in her eyes. "I don't deserve this." "Deserve what?" "Your kindness, your patience, your—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Mason leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze steady on hers. "Zara, you deserve someone who treats you well. You deserve someone who keeps their word. You deserve someone who sees how remarkable you are and values that. If you don't believe that, then that's the biggest lie you've ever believed." The tears spilled over and Zara wiped them away angrily. "I hate crying." "It's all right to cry." "No, it's not. Crying is weak." "Crying is human," Mason said gently. "You've been strong for so long, holding everything together. It's all right to let go sometimes." Zara let herself cry then, really cry for the first time since Daniel's betrayal. She cried for the trust she'd lost, for the fear she'd carried, for the loneliness of believing everyone was secretly false. Mason didn't move to embrace her or offer empty comfort. He just sat with her, his quiet presence a steady anchor, and somehow that was exactly what she needed. When the tears finally stopped, Zara felt exhausted but lighter, as if she'd set down a weight she'd been carrying for months. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For being here, for being patient, for being you." Mason smiled, and it was warm and genuine. "You're welcome." The storm cleared the next morning, revealing a landscape transformed by snow. The work of digging out began immediately, and life returned to its normal rhythm. But something had changed between Zara and Mason. She no longer avoided him, and their conversations grew longer, more personal. She told him about her mother, about growing up without female guidance, about the loneliness of being the only woman on a ranch. He told her about his parents, about the hard years after their death, about the places he'd been, and the people he'd met. She began to notice things she'd deliberately ignored before. The way Mason's eyes lit up when he laughed, the strength in his hands when he worked, the the gentleness with which he treated animals and people alike. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't watching, with an expression of such longing and tenderness that it made her breath catch. March brought the first hints of spring. The snow began to melt, revealing the brown earth beneath. Birds returned and the days grew longer. Thomas's health had stabilized, though he would never return to heavy labor. He spent more time giving advice than doing physical work, and he watched Zara and Mason with knowing eyes. One evening, as Zara was closing up the chicken coop, Mason approached her with something in his hand. "I made you something," he said, sounding almost shy. It was a small wooden carving of a horse, every detail carefully rendered. "It's beautiful," Zara breathed. "You made this. I whittle sometimes in the evenings, helps me think." He placed it in her palm. "I wanted you to have it." "Why?" "Because you love horses. Because I wanted to make you something with my own hands. Because—" He paused. "Because I wanted to." Zara closed her fingers around the carving. "I don't have anything to give you in return." "I don't need anything in return. It's a gift, not a trade." She looked up at him, standing there in the fading light. This man who had shown up in her life and quietly, patiently, proved himself true. "Mason, I think I'm starting to trust you." His whole face brightened. Yeah, it terrifies me, but I think I am." "That's all right," Mason said. "Trust is scary, but I promise you, Zara, I will never give you reason to regret it. That's a big promise. It's one I intend to keep." They stood there in the twilight, and Zara felt her heart opening despite all her efforts to keep it closed. She wasn't ready to say the words yet, wasn't ready to fully admit what she was feeling, but she thought Mason probably knew anyway. April brought warmer weather and spring calving. They had a successful season with healthy calves and no major losses. The herd had survived the winter in good condition, and Thomas began planning the spring drive to market. The money from the sale would restore their finances and allow them to finally pay Mason back his wages, but Mason had other concerns. One afternoon, he asked Thomas if he could speak with him privately. Zara watched them go into the house together, her curiosity burning. Inside, Mason stood before Thomas with his hat in his hands, nervous but determined. "Sir, I'd like your permission to court your daughter properly." Thomas leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. "Took you long enough to ask. I wanted to prove myself first, show her she could trust me. And do you think she trusts you now?" "I think she's starting to," Mason said, "but I won't rush her. I'll go at whatever pace she needs." "Do you love her?" "Yes, sir, I do." "And what are your intentions? To marry her if she'll have me, to build a life with her, to be a partner to her in every way that matters?" Mason met Thomas's eyes steadily. "I know I don't have much. I don't own land, don't have money saved beyond what you've paid me. But I'm a hard worker, and I'll spend every day of my life making sure she's happy and cared for." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, studying the young man before him. "You know she's been hurt before." "I know. She won't make it easy on you." "I wouldn't expect her to. She'll test you, push you, try to find the crack in your armor." "Let her," Mason said. "I have nothing to hide." Thomas nodded slowly. "You have my permission, Mason, but you understand that the hard part isn't asking me. It's convincing her." "I know, sir, but I'm patient." When Mason emerged from the house, Zara was waiting by the barn, trying to look like she hadn't been watching for him. "What was that about?" she asked, trying for casual. "I asked your father's permission to court you," Mason said simply. Zara's heart jumped. "You what?" "I asked his permission to court you properly. He said yes. But the real question is whether you'll say yes." "Mason, You don't have to answer now," Mason said quickly. "Take all the time you need. But I want you to know my intentions are honorable and serious. I love you, Zara Gallagher. I've loved you for months now, probably since that first calf we saved together." maybe even before that. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you're not impressed by smooth words. I love how hard you work and how much you care even when you pretend you don't. I love everything about you, and I want to spend my life proving that you can trust me." Zara stood frozen, her mind reeling. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, exactly what she'd sworn never to let happen again. A man declaring his love, making promises, speaking words that sounded too good to be true. But this was Mason. Mason, who had spent months simply being reliable, who had never asked for anything in return for his help, who had risked his life for her in a blizzard, who had been patient when she pushed him away and kind when she was cruel. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know. What if you're lying? What if this is all some elaborate game?" "It's not," Mason said. "But I can't prove that with words. I can only prove it by continuing to show up, continuing to keep my promises, continuing to be here for as long as you'll let me." "What if I can never fully trust you? What if I'm too broken?" Mason stepped closer, his eyes soft. "You're not broken. You're careful. There's a difference. And I don't need you to trust me completely right now. I just need you to give me a chance to keep proving myself." Zara looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of deception, any shadow of false intent. She found nothing but sincerity and hope and love. "All right," she said softly. "You can court me, but I'm warning you I won't make it easy." Mason's face broke into a wide smile. "I wouldn't expect anything less." He reached for her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she let him take it. His grip was warm and sure, and Zara felt something settle in her chest, like a door opening after being locked for too long. The courting that followed was unlike anything Zara had imagined. There were no grand gestures or flowery speeches. Instead, Mason courted her through consistency. He showed up every day, did exactly what he said he would do, and treated her with unfailing respect and care. He brought her coffee in the mornings just the way she liked it. He noticed when she was tired and took on extra work without being asked. He listened when she talked, really listened, and remembered everything she said. He made her laugh with dry observations about the animals and the weather. He never pushed for more physical affection than she was comfortable with, content with holding her hand or sitting close. Slowly, day by day, Zara felt her defenses crumbling. She caught herself looking forward to seeing him in the mornings. She found reasons to work beside him even when it wasn't necessary. She started to believe, truly believe, that he meant what he said. May brought a confrontation that tested everything. Jack Morrison showed up at the ranch again, this time with a sheriff's deputy and papers claiming that Thomas Gallagher owed money on an old debt. It was a fabrication, an attempt to force the sale of the ranch through legal pressure. "This is ridiculous," Thomas said, his face red with anger. "I never borrowed money from your father." "The papers say otherwise," Jack said smugly. "Either you pay up or we take the ranch." Mason appeared in the doorway, his expression dangerous. "Let me see those papers." Jack handed them over with a sneer. Mason studied them carefully, then looked up. "These are forgeries. The signature doesn't match Mr. Gallagher's hand, and the date on the supposed loan is from a time when Morrison's father was still back east. He wasn't even in Iowa yet." "You can't prove that," Jack said, but he looked nervous. "Actually, I can," Mason said. "I worked for a lawyer in Denver for a winter. I learned to spot forged documents, and I'm willing to testify to that in court." The deputy looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Morrison, if these papers are forged, that's a serious crime." Jack's bluster deflated. "You don't know what you're talking about, Grant." "Yes, I do," Mason said calmly. "And if you don't leave right now and never come back with false claims, I'll make sure everyone in 3 counties knows what you tried to do here." Jack looked between Mason's steady gaze and the deputy's increasingly suspicious expression. Finally, he snatched the papers back and stormed out, his threats hanging empty in the air. After they left, Zara threw her arms around Mason without thinking. "You saved us," she said into his chest. Mason wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "That's what family does," he said softly. Zara pulled back to look at him. "Family, if you'll have me," Mason said. "I'd like to be family. I'd like to marry you, Zara, if you're ready to trust me that much." Zara's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were happy tears. "You've spent months proving yourself." "Years, actually," Mason said with a slight smile. "It's been almost a full year since I came here. You'd really wait years for me to trust you." "I'd wait forever if that's what it took, but I'm hoping I don't have to." Zara looked at this man who had been nothing but true, who had proven himself through countless small actions and a few heroic ones, who had asked for nothing but the chance to love her. She thought about how far she'd come from the bitter, suspicious woman who had refused to believe kind words could be genuine. "Yes," she said. "Yes." Mason's voice was hopeful but uncertain. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I trust you. Yes, I love you too, even though it took me a while to admit it." Mason's face transformed with joy. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and reverent, and Zara kissed him back, finally allowing herself to feel the love she'd been holding back for months. When they pulled apart, both breathless and smiling, Thomas was standing on the porch, grinning. "About damn time," he called out. "I was beginning to think you two would dance around each other forever." They laughed, and Zara felt lighter than she had in years. The fear was still there, a small voice in the back of her mind, but it was drowned out by the certainty she felt when she looked at Mason. This was real. This was true. This was worth the risk. They were married in June of 1879 in a simple ceremony in Council Bluffs. Thomas gave Zara away, his face radiating pride and happiness. The guests were few, just some neighbors and friends from town, but the joy was abundant. Zara wore a dress of cream-colored silk that had been her mother's, altered to fit. Mason wore his best clothes, his hair finally properly cut, his face clean-shaven. When the preacher asked if Mason would honor and cherish Zara, Mason looked into her eyes and said, "I will. With everything I have, for as long as I live, I will." And when Zara said her vows, her voice was steady and sure. "I will trust you. I will love you. I will build a life with you." The kiss they shared sealed a promise that both of them intended to keep. They didn't have money for a honeymoon, so they stayed at the ranch. But Thomas moved into the smaller room and gave them the master bedroom, saying it was past time he downsized anyway. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, Mason patient with Zara's nervousness, both of them discovering each other with care and growing passion. Afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, Zara traced patterns on Mason's chest. "I never thought I could be this happy," she said softly. "Neither did I," Mason said. "I spent so long wandering, looking for a place to belong. I never imagined I'd find a home and a family all at once." "Do you miss it? The wandering?" "Not even a little bit," Mason said firmly. "This is where I want to be, with you. Forever." Zara snuggled closer, breathing in his scent, feeling his heartbeat under her cheek. "I'm sorry it took me so long to trust you. Don't be sorry. You had good reason to be careful. What matters is that we're here now." "I love you," Zara said, the words still feeling new and strange but right. "I love you too," Mason said, kissing the top of her head. The months that followed were the happiest of Zara's life. She and Mason worked the ranch as partners, their coordination nearly perfect. Thomas's health continued to stabilize, and he took on the role of advisor and grandfather in waiting with enthusiasm. In the fall, they drove the cattle to market and got good prices. With the money, they paid off all debts, repaired the barn, and even bought some new breeding stock. The ranch began to thrive in ways it hadn't for years. One evening in late October, Zara realized she'd missed her monthly cycle. A visit to the doctor in town confirmed what she'd suspected. She was pregnant. She carried the news home like a precious treasure, nervous and excited all at once. She told Mason that night as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "We're going to have a baby," she said simply. Mason turned to stare at her, his eyes wide. "Really? Really?" The doctor confirmed it today. Mason let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. He set her down gently, then knelt before her, pressing his ear to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he said softly. "This is your father. I can't wait to meet you." Zara ran her fingers through his hair, overcome with emotion. "You're going to be a wonderful father." "I'm going to try," Mason said, looking up at her with shining eyes. "I'm going to love this child and you with everything I have." "I know you will," Zara said. "I trust you." Those 3 words still meant everything to Mason. He stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of glass. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for trusting me, for loving me, for giving me this life." "Thank you for being worth trusting," Zara said. Thomas was overjoyed at the news of a grandchild. He began planning immediately, talking about building a cradle and adding onto the house. The winter passed with preparations for the baby and for the future. In May of 1880, Zara went into labor. It was long and difficult, and Mason stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement. When their son finally arrived, red-faced and screaming, Mason cried openly. "He's perfect," Mason said, cradling the tiny baby with infinite care. "He's absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas after Zara's father and called him Tommy. The old man held his namesake with tears streaming down his weathered face, and Zara thought her heart might burst from happiness. The years that followed were full of hard work, joy, and continued growth. Tommy grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved the ranch and everything on it. 2 years after Tommy's birth, they had a daughter they named Clara, who had her father's brown eyes and her mother's determination. Mason proved himself not just as a husband but as a father. He was patient with the children, teaching them with the same steady consistency he'd shown Zara. He never raised his voice in anger, never broke a promise to them, and showed them through example what it meant to be honest and true. Zara watched him with their children and fell in love with him all over again every day. She marveled at how far she'd come from the bitter, suspicious woman who had refused to believe kind words could be genuine. Mason had spent years proving his were true, and in doing so, he'd healed something in her that she'd thought was permanently broken. Thomas Sr. lived to see his grandchildren grow. He passed peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1885, surrounded by family, his last words a benediction. "Take care of each other." They mourned him deeply, but took comfort in knowing he'd lived to see the ranch thriving and his daughter happy. Mason and Zara expanded the house, adding rooms for their growing family and their hopes for the future. In the fall of 1886, they welcomed their 3rd child, a son they named Mason Jr. He was born during the first frost, and his father held him against the window, showing him the silver-touched landscape. "This is your home," Mason told his newborn son. "This land, this family, this love, it's all yours and it's all real." Zara, recovering in bed, watched her husband with their children gathered around and felt a peace she'd never known was possible. Tommy at 6 years old, Clara at 4, and now Mason Jr. in his father's arms. A family built on trust and kept promises. "What are you thinking?" Mason asked, catching her expression. I'm thinking about the first day you arrived, Zara said. How I was convinced you'd turn out to be a liar like all the others. And now, Mason asked, coming to sit beside her on the bed. Now I know that you're the most honest man I've ever met. You spent years proving your words were true, and you've never stopped proving it. Mason leaned over and kissed her softly. I'll keep proving it every day for the rest of our lives. I know you will, Zara said. That's what I love about you. The children clamored for attention, and the moment dissolved into the happy chaos of family life. But later that night, after the children were asleep and they lay together in the darkness, Mason and Zara talked about the future. I want to expand the herd, Mason said. Really make this ranch something special. Build something that will last for Tommy and Clara and Mason Jr. and any other children we might have. Any other children, Zara said with a laugh. You planning on a whole army? I'm planning on a legacy, Mason said. I want our grandchildren and great-grandchildren to work this land and know it was built on honesty and hard work and love. That sounds perfect, Zara said. They lay in comfortable silence for a while, then Zara said, Mason, do you remember what you said that night in the barn when I asked how long you were willing to wait for me to trust you? I said as long as it takes. And you meant it. You really were willing to wait years. I was, Mason said, and I would have waited longer if needed. You were worth waiting for. Zara felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears this time. I'm so glad I finally let myself believe you. So am I, Mason said, pulling her closer. So am I. The ranch continued to prosper over the years. By 1890, the Gallagher Grant Ranch was one of the most successful in the county, known for quality cattle and honest dealings. Mason and Zara had earned reputations as fair but shrewd business people, and other ranchers sought their advice. They had 2 more children, daughters named Sarah and Emily, born in 1888 and 1890 respectively. The house rang with laughter and noise, and Zara often thought back to the lonely, bitter woman she'd been and marveled at the transformation. One evening in the summer of 1891, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Zara took Mason's hand. You remember the first words you ever said to me? She asked. Mason thought back, a smile playing on his lips. I said, morning, I'm Mason. Your father hired me yesterday. And I barely looked at you. I was so convinced you'd be just another disappointment. You said you weren't interested in conversation, compliments, or anything else I might want to offer. I was terrible to you, Zara said with a laugh. I can't believe you put up with me. You weren't terrible. You were protecting yourself, and it made your trust when I finally earned it mean everything. Zara squeezed his hand. You did more than earn my trust. You taught me how to trust again. You showed me that kind words can be true, that promises can be kept, that love doesn't have to end in betrayal. You taught me things too, Mason said. You taught me that patience is rewarded, that the best things in life are worth fighting for, and that home isn't a place but a person. They watched Tommy, now 11, helping his younger siblings catch fireflies in the gathering dusk. Clara was organizing the effort with typical efficiency, while Mason Jr. provided enthusiastic but not particularly helpful assistance. Sarah and Emily toddled after the older children, their laughter bright in the warm air. This is everything I never knew I wanted, Zara said softly. A family, a home, someone who keeps his promises. This is everything I always dreamed of, Mason said, a place to belong. People who depend on me. You. Always you, Zara said, turning to look at him. Even after years together, she still felt her heart skip when he smiled at her. Always, Mason agreed and kissed her as the stars began to appear overhead. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and joys. They weathered droughts and hard winters, market fluctuations, and the occasional illness. But they weathered them together, Mason and Zara working as the partners they'd become, supporting each other through every difficulty. Their children grew, learning the ranch work and absorbing their parents' values. Tommy showed a talent for working with horses and eventually took over that aspect of the ranch. Clara had her mother's head for numbers and managed the financial records. Mason Jr. was the charmer, smooth with buyers and good at negotiating. Sarah and Emily were still young but already showing their own unique strengths. In 1895, when Tommy turned 16, Mason sat him down for a serious talk about honesty and keeping one's word. "Your word is the most valuable thing you have," Mason told his oldest son. "More valuable than money or land or anything else. If you give someone your word, you keep it no matter what. That's how you build a life that matters." "Is that what you did with Mom?" Tommy asked. "I've heard the stories about how she didn't trust you at first." "Your mother had good reason not to trust easily," Mason said. "She'd been hurt by someone who made promises he didn't keep. So I had to prove to her over years that I meant what I said. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat because she's worth it." "Do you think I'll find someone like that?" Tommy asked. "I think if you're honest and true, if you work hard and keep your promises, you'll find someone who recognizes your worth," Mason said. "It might not happen right away, but the best things are worth waiting for." Tommy took his father's words to heart, and in time, proved to be as honest and hardworking as Mason himself. In 1898, Thomas Sr.'s old friend from town approached Mason with an offer. He wanted to sell his smaller ranch and retire to live with his daughter back east. He offered Mason first right of purchase, saying he'd rather see the land go to someone like the Grants than to strangers. Mason and Zara talked it over carefully. Expanding would mean taking on debt and more work, but it would also secure their children's futures and add to the legacy they were building. "What do you think?" Mason asked Zara. They were in their bedroom, the house quiet with the children asleep. "I think we should do it," Zara said. "We've built something good here. We can handle the expansion." "It's a risk," Mason warned. "Life is a risk," Zara said, "but I trust us. I trust you. We'll make it work." They bought the additional land and the ranch grew even more successful. With Tommy coming of age and ready to take on more responsibility, they had the workforce to manage the expansion. The Gallagher Grant Ranch became one of the largest in the region, employing several hands and producing some of the finest cattle in Iowa. But success never changed Mason and Zara's core values. They remained fair employers, treating their ranch hands with respect and paying honest wages. They kept their promises to suppliers and buyers. They raised their children to value integrity over profit, hard work over shortcuts. In 1900, Tommy married a young woman from town named Margaret after a courtship that would have made his parents proud. He wooed her with patience and consistency, proving himself reliable and true. Mason and Zara watched their son marry and thought about their own journey, exchanging smiles across the church. Clara married 2 years later to a teacher who had moved to Council Bluffs from Chicago. Mason Jr. was courting a rancher's daughter from the next county. Sarah and Emily, now 12 and 10, were growing into capable young women who could ride and rope as well as any man. One evening in the spring of 1903, Mason and Zara found themselves alone on the porch, a rare occurrence with their bustling household. Tommy and Margaret had moved into the smaller ranch house on the new property. Clara lived in town with her teacher husband. Mason Jr. was still at home but out with friends for the evening, and the girls were at a church social. "We're getting old," Zara said, leaning against Mason's shoulder. "Speak for yourself," Mason said with a laugh. He was 49 now, his dark hair streaked with silver, his face weathered by years of outdoor work. Zara was 44, her beauty matured but not diminished. "Remember when we were young and everything seemed so difficult?" Zara asked. "You thought I was a liar waiting to reveal myself," Mason said. "And you were the most stubborn man alive, refusing to give up on me even when I gave you every reason to." "Best stubbornness of my life," Mason said. Zara turned to look at him. "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For being patient, for proving yourself, for loving me when I was too scared to love you back, for building this life with me." Mason cupped her face gently. "You don't need to thank me for any of that. Loving you has never been a hardship. It's been the greatest privilege of my life. Even when I was terrible to you at the beginning, even then. Because I could see who you really were underneath the fear. I could see your strength and your heart, and I knew you were worth the wait." Zara kissed him, deep and sweet, and thought about the 24 years they'd been married, the 25 years since he'd first arrived at the ranch. A quarter-century of kept promises, of trust earned and maintained, of love that had grown deeper with each passing year. "I love you," she said, "more than I thought possible to love anyone." "I love you too," Mason said. "Always have, always will." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere in the house, they could hear movement as the housekeeper prepared dinner. From the distant pasture came the lowing of cattle. The land stretched around them, solid and real, built by their work and sacrifice. "You ever regret it?" Zara asked. "Staying here instead of continuing to drift? You could have seen more places, had more adventures." "Not for a single second," Mason said firmly. "I spent years drifting because I hadn't found what I was looking for. Then I found it here. I found you and a home and a purpose. Why would I regret that? I just wanted to be sure." "Be sure," Mason said. "This is exactly where I want to be. This is exactly the life I want. You are exactly who I want to spend every moment with." Zara smiled and settled more comfortably against him. They sat in peaceful silence, watching the stars appear one by one, the same stars that had watched over them through all the years of building trust and love. The years continued to flow, bringing more changes and milestones. Grandchildren arrived, first from Tommy and Margaret, then from Clara and her husband. The ranch was passed increasingly into the younger generation's hands as Mason and Zara stepped back from the daily management. Mason Jr. eventually married his rancher's daughter in 1905, and they built a house on the far end of the property. Sarah surprised everyone by declaring she wanted to attend college, and her parents supported her decision, sending her to study in Chicago. Emily stayed close to home, developing a talent for horse breeding that enhanced the ranch's reputation. In 1910, Mason and Zara celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party that half the county attended, testimony to the respect and affection the couple had earned over the decades. At the party, Tommy stood and gave a speech that brought tears to his mother's eyes. "My father taught me that a man's word is his bond," Tommy said. "And I've watched him live that principle every day of my life. He promised to take care of this family and this land, and he's kept that promise for over 3 decades. He promised to love my mother with everything he had, and I've never seen that love waver for a single moment. He's shown all of us what it means to be a person of integrity, and we're all better for it." Mason, embarrassed by the attention, tried to deflect, but Zara stood and took his hand. "My husband is too modest," she said, "but Tommy's right." Mason spent years proving his words were true, and he's never stopped proving it. "I came into our relationship broken and unable to trust, and he healed me through patience and consistency. He taught me that love can be real, that promises can be kept, and that happy endings are possible. He gave me everything I have, everything I am, and I will love him until my last breath." The applause was thunderous, and Mason pulled Zara into his arms, kissing her in front of everyone, making their grandchildren giggle and their children smile knowingly. That night, lying in bed after all the guests had gone and the house had quieted, Zara traced the lines on Mason's face. "We did it," she said softly. "Did what? Built a life. Raised a family, created a legacy. We actually did everything we dreamed of." "We did," Mason agreed. "And I'd do it all again exactly the same way, as long as it ended with us here together." "You're still the same man who showed up looking for work," Zara marveled. "Still honest, still true, still keeping your promises. And you're still the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever known," Mason said. "Still challenging me, still making me be my best self." They fell asleep holding each other, as they had for thousands of nights before, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring more of the same. Hard work, family, love, and the solid foundation of trust that had been built slowly over years and maintained carefully every day since. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and the Grants continued with them. In 1915, Sarah returned from Chicago with a degree and a husband, a lawyer who fell in love with both Sarah and the ranch life. They settled in Council Bluffs, and Sarah put her education to work helping other women in the county pursue their own dreams. Mason and Zara, now in their 60s, took on the role of family elders with grace. They were surrounded by children, grandchildren, and a growing number of great-grandchildren. The ranch they'd built together thrived under the management of the next generation, incorporating new techniques while maintaining the core values Mason and Zara had instilled. One evening in the fall of 1918, Zara felt unwell. She tried to dismiss it as fatigue, but Mason insisted on calling the doctor. The diagnosis was concerning but not immediately dire. Her heart was weakening. She would need to rest more, stress less, and accept that her body was slowing down. "I don't want to slow down," Zara told Mason privately. "There's still so much to do." "The kids have it handled," Mason said gently. "It's time to let them carry more of the weight. We've earned our rest." "I don't want to rest," Zara said, but there was no heat in it. She was tired, more tired than she wanted to admit. Mason took her hand. "Then we'll rest together. We'll sit on the porch and watch the grandchildren play. We'll take slow walks around the property. We'll spend our days in each other's company, which is all I've ever really wanted anyway." Over the following months, Mason was true to his word. He curtailed his own activities to match Zara's reduced capacity, never making her feel like a burden. They spent long afternoons on the porch, talking about everything and nothing, reminiscing about the past and marveling at the present. One afternoon, Zara said, "Do you remember the day I finally agreed to let you court me? How could I forget? It was one of the best days of my life." "I was so scared," Zara admitted. "I thought for sure you'd eventually disappoint me like everyone else had." "But I didn't," Mason said with gentle pride. "No, you didn't. You never did. Not once in 40 years have you broken a promise or spoken false words." She turned to look at him. "That's remarkable, Mason. You're remarkable." "I just kept my word," Mason said. "That's all I ever tried to do." "Most people can't manage that. But you did, every day for decades. You proved that kind words could be true, and in doing so, you saved me." "You saved yourself," Mason corrected. "You chose to trust again. You chose to believe. I just tried to be worthy of that choice." "And you were," Zara said. "You are." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching the sun paint gold across the fields they'd worked together for so long. The land stretched around them, solid and enduring, a testament to years of hard work and kept promises. Zara's health stabilized for a time, and they had several good years. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1919 with another big party, surrounded by the sprawling family they'd created. By then, they had 12 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. At the party, Mason pulled Zara onto the floor for a slow dance. His hair was white now, his body not as strong as it once had been, but his arms around her were still sure and safe. 40 years, Zara said. Can you believe it? Best 40 years of my life, Mason said. I'd marry you again tomorrow if I could. You'd have to court me first, Zara teased. Prove yourself all over again. I'd do it, Mason said seriously. I'd wait years again if that's what it took. You've always been worth it. Zara laid her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes, letting the music and the love wash over her. She thought about the scared, bitter young woman she'd been, so certain that all men were liars. And she thought about the patient cowboy who had proved her wrong, one kept promise at a time. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For everything. For being true, for being you, for giving me this beautiful life. Mason held her closer. Thank you for letting me. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for this family and this life and 40 years of love. They danced until the song ended, and then they danced to the next one and the one after that, unwilling to let go of the moment or each other. The 1920s brought change to the world. The ranch adapted to new technologies and new ways of doing things, but the core remained the same. Mason and Zara, now in their 70s, spent most of their time on the porch of the main house, receiving visitors and dispensing advice to anyone who asked. Young couples from town would sometimes seek them out, asking the secret to their long, happy marriage. Mason and Zara's answers were always similar. Trust, Zara would say. Real trust built slowly through consistent actions. Honesty, Mason would add. Say what you mean what you say, and keep your promises. Patience, they would say together. Love is a choice you make every day, not just a feeling. Choose to love even when it's hard. In 1923, Zara's heart began to fail more seriously. The doctor was frank. She had months, maybe a year if she was lucky. Zara took the news calmly, but Mason was devastated. I'm not ready, he told her that night, his voice breaking. I'm not ready to lose you. I'm not going anywhere yet, Zara said, taking his face in her hands. I'm still here. We still have time. Not enough time. There's never enough time. Then we make the most of what we have, Zara said. We've been good at that all along. Mason pulled her into his arms and cried, and Zara held him, this man who had been her rock for 44 years, who had never wavered in his love or his promises. She knew his heart would break when she died, and it pained her more than her own approaching death. Promise me something, she said. Anything. Promise me you'll keep living after I'm gone. Stay close to the kids and grandkids. Keep working the ranch as long as you're able. Don't let grief consume you. I don't know if I can, Mason said honestly. You can, Zara said. You're the strongest man I know. You spent years proving your words were true. Prove it one more time. Promise me you'll live. I promise, Mason said, though the words felt like ash in his mouth. But he had never broken a promise to her, and he wouldn't start now. Zara's final months were a strange mixture of sorrow and sweetness. She spent time with each of her children and many of her grandchildren, sharing memories and offering final pieces of wisdom. She sat on the porch with Mason every day, holding his hand, talking or just being together in silence. One evening in late August of 1924, as the sun set in shades of amber and rose, Zara said, I need to tell you something important. What is it? Mason asked, his voice rough with unshed tears. You changed my life, Zara said. When you came here, I was closed off, bitter, unable to believe in goodness or love. You could have given up on me. You could have moved on to someone easier. But you stayed and you proved yourself day after day, year after year. You showed me that love could be real and true. You gave me a family, a home, a life beyond what I ever imagined possible. I need you to know that every moment with you has been a gift. The gift was you, Mason said, tears streaming down his weathered face. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. You gave my life meaning and purpose. You made me want to be better, to be worthy of you. You were always worthy, Zara said. From the very beginning, you were exactly who you appeared to be, honest, true, and good. That's so rare, Mason. You're so rare. They held each other as the stars came out, and Mason felt like his heart was being torn in two. Zara Gallagher Grant died peacefully in her sleep 3 days later, Mason's hand in hers. She was 69 years old, and she'd lived to see her children grown, her grandchildren thriving, and her ranch prospering. More importantly, she'd lived to learn that trust could be rewarded, that love could be true, and that happy endings were possible. Mason kept his promise to her, though it was the hardest promise he'd ever kept. He continued to live, to spend time with family, to work the ranch when he was able. But there was a sadness in his eyes that never fully faded, a missing piece that could never be replaced. He lived another 8 years until 1932, when he passed away at 78. His children were with him, and his last words were about Zara. "I kept my promises," he whispered, "all of them," and he had. For over 50 years, from that first day he'd arrived at the Gallagher Ranch until his last breath, Mason Grant had been exactly who he'd claimed to be, an honest cowboy who kept his word. The Gallagher Grant Ranch continued for generations, and the story of Mason and Zara became family legend. Their great-great-grandchildren would sit on that same porch and hear about the cowboy who spent years proving his words were true, and the woman who learned to trust again. The story was told as an example of patience, consistency, and the transformative power of genuine love. Because in the end, that's what it had been about. Mason showing up day after day, keeping his promises, speaking truth, and waiting as long as it took for Zara to see that he meant every word. And Zara slowly, painfully, bravely choosing to trust again, to believe that not all men were liars, to open her heart despite her fear. They had built something remarkable together. A family, a ranch, and a love story that proved that broken trust could be repaired, that kind words could be true, and that happy endings were worth fighting for. Their legacy lived on not just in the land they'd worked, but in the values they'd demonstrated, and the love they'd shared so completely. The ranch stood as testimony to what could be built on a foundation of honesty and kept promises. And somewhere, perhaps, Mason and Zara were together again, holding hands and watching over the family they'd created, the love they'd built, and the proof that some promises, when made by the right person to the right person, really do last forever.